Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Action Sports Podcast. This episode is going to be very different because my guest today is me. I know, kind of weird, but I really wanted to just take a quick moment. We're going to make this really short, actually, very, very short. No reason to go crazy long, but I'm excited because this is actually going to be the kickoff of some new things that are going to be changing. And I just wanted to make sure I touch base with everybody and tell you what's going to be happening. So, real quick, I just want to give a quick understanding of the podcast, where it's been and where it's headed. So I started originally a podcast called the Action Sports Podcast. Started it back 2018. It didn't really take off, or I actually didn't post anything online until 2019. For the very first guest that I remember having, I was sitting in North Carolina. I went out for a business trip, and I was sitting in a hotel room, and I scheduled. I actually remember this day. I remember sitting down prior to leaving, and I was like, okay, the guest that I'm having on, he's from here, from where I was at the time. So he's in my time zone. What time zone do I have to calculate this out like in a week in advance? How's this gonna work? Come to find out, it was less complicated than I really needed to take it. So I flew out there, got in my hotel room. I believe it was the last night I was actually there on that trip. I actually had the opportunity to sit down over the phone with David McClure. He's a pro snowmobiler. For those who don't know, pro hill climb snowmobiler, and very well known in the Arctic out industry. I knew David from actually working at Rexburg Motorsports, and he came in there quite a bit, so I got to know him quite well. So at that time, I had him. Then I got Louis Skibo on with Power Mods. That was a lot of fun hanging out with him. Uh, After that, I believe I had my own startup episode, and then I stopped. So there was a time in 2018, the fall of 2018, I started working on this, and then stopped with the podcast. And then in 2019, I was like, okay, I need to start picking this up a little bit. So 2019 came around, and I decided to jump back into it about 9 months later, and I actually got a hold of Kyle Brotherson with Dirt Bike Channel. Super, super excited about that. I was like, this guy's well known. I'm really excited he's going to be a podcast guest, and I think this is going to be a lot of fun. Great guest. Had a lot of fun hanging out with him. Did it in person. Actually, before I got to do it in person with him, I knew that the quality of the podcast wasn't where I wanted it. So I was like, I got to change this. Took some time and invested some money into some equipment. And then I went to Kyle Brotherson's house, and I was like, hey, let's do a podcast. And he was totally down for it. Didn't know who I was, didn't know who he was, but I was able to sit down and learn a lot from him. And then after the podcast, totally transparent with it. It's a funny conversation him and I had, but he's like, I contemplated not doing it, but I wanted to kind of see what it would take to do a podcast, because he's been YouTube for a long time. So he told me that I was his guinea pig doing the podcast. And I was like, oh, I'm okay with that. I appreciate you being 100% upfront with me. So I was very happy. Since then, though, I've had some amazing guests. I've been very happy with the inside of the podcast, the Get Out and Ride podcast. I had guests like Rich Larson, Landon Powell, Josh Knight, Skylar Adams, Zach Collins, like DJ Osborne. I had quite a few good guests on the podcast, and I'm not naming all of them, but I had a bunch, and I was very, very happy with. And I was able to see that I was really finding my niche doing the podcast. Then I came across a guest named Aaron Fraser. And that was about 2020 is when I came across him. Actually, it was like 2019 and into 2020. And finally got him to nail down a time. The guy was really busy, but I saw an ad, saw like something he posted on Instagram, and it was very fascinating. I was like, well, this guy's pretty well known because he has this ad. There's a lot of people like his content, so he must be well known. So I was like, what are your thoughts about joining on the podcast? And afterwards, he told me, he's like, I almost said no, but at the time, he's like, I need to change some things. I need to be more, I get more exposure. So he said yes. So we hopped on, got to learn a lot about what he was wanting to do, like his future. And I was like, wow, this really meshes with what I want to do with mine. He's like, oh, that's cool, dude. So we started building a relationship. And a few months later, he's like, he gets me back on the phone. He's like, what are your thoughts about doing a podcast with me? And I was like, oh, I mean, another episode. He's like, no, actually, joining me and doing a podcast, like being a podcast for my business. And I was like, okay. At the time, I was like, we both had the same vision, but really what the catalyst was is there was an opportunity because somebody was further ahead than me. So I was like, this actually makes sense. Let's jump on this and see where it goes. And it was one of the best decisions. It was the best decision I did for the podcast, hands down. So we started up the Action Sports podcast in 2021, a few months after we talked, and the business started to really open up and start to work. So really excited because the last year and a half we've had basically 150 guests, about to hit 150 here soon. Amazing opportunities, talking to a lot of people, becoming friends with a lot of people. A lot of you actually that listen to the podcast have been guests. It's just been an amazing ride. I'm very excited about it. I want to touch back, and like I said, I'm keeping this short. When I was figuring out with the Get Out and Ride podcast, I knew I wanted quality, and I didn't like just the phone conversations, and to be honest, I still don't. But it kind of got interesting in 2020 when the pandemic was here, so I I had to switch. It was a good thing because it opened up the opportunity to talk to basically the world about action sports. And I've had some amazing guests. I've had guests from Germany on. I've had guests from Australia on. I've had guests all over Canada. I've had guests Alaska. Haven't had anybody from Hawaii yet. All over the U.S. And so very excited about that. Very excited that this is a kind of a global podcast, and just want to keep pushing so we can get more and more attention to it. I think it's been a great platform. I've been very happy with it. Aaron Fraser inside the Action Sports Club has been a key factor of why this podcast is successful. It's just because we were able to work together and really push for it. But I still believe that there's more quality that I can bring to the table with the podcast and really hone in and focus on the podcast. So I got a couple of things I want to share with guys and gals. So the number one thing that I'm going to start working on or start doing as of this podcast is we're actually, if you remember a few episodes in the past, I've actually mentioned multiple times that I record these on video, but they just never were put up. I've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of content that is sitting on a hard drive, and I want to start putting it actually on YouTube. And so this podcast will be, it's not the first one. I actually have already one up and learned pretty quickly that takes a lot of time and energy. So starting with this podcast, I'm going to be putting these episodes on YouTube. Now, I'm really excited about that because I think this is going to bring a lot more value to another audience, and we're going to continue to grow and be really strong. So number one, we're moving over to the YouTube. Talked about it for long enough, and I felt that a pivot was necessary. So here we are pivoting. We're going to pivot to get the podcast doing something that it needs to be doing. Podcast on YouTube. Quality. We're going to move into the quality. I want to produce more quality. And so that's going to, over the last 3-4 years, I've been honing in a skill of communication and conversation. Really, it's been more conversation. And I believe that I can still refine it even more. So I'm dedicating more time to conversation and actually getting better questions and bringing out more information, better quality of these guests that we have on the podcast. I think there's still a lot more information that I can extract, and not to sound weird, but just get a little bit more clarity on certain things. And I think that a lot of the guests will appreciate that as well. I haven't had a podcast guest that said that the podcast was terrible. I've had a couple that say it was okay, but a vast majority, 99% of my guests have said it's been amazing, and they've been happy they did it. And they really thought it was a good opportunity. So there's definitely just some tweaks and some refinements I just want to work on. So just want to work on the quality. I also want to bring more or give more back to the athletes, the professionals in the industry, business owners and stuff. So social media is going to be more about that. We're going to be posting a lot more content in recognition of those individuals that are on the podcast. So more than just one post a week. There's going to be quite a few posts a week and discussion and stuff like that. Really get the buzz going and get more people listening to the podcast. Give the the hype up on each episode, stuff like that. Just really get it going and buzzing. I think that's going to be really important. And the next few months, we'll start to see it take off. We're going to be dropping down to one. I've thought about this quite a bit, and I've jumped back and forth to like one per week, two per week, three per week, four per week. I even consider doing five per week because we saw some pretty great growth with it. But I strongly believe that if I can produce better quality and bring on video and give more recognition throughout the week, that we can still get better numbers and get more people listening to the podcast by going to one a week. And so one podcast per week is going to be dropping every Thursday. So this episode is dropped on Thursday. It's actually going to be released, so you individuals know, it's released at early in the morning. The video, though, will be released about seven. Well, so I'm going to be moving. That it's kind of a sneak peek. I'm actually going to be moving here soon. Probably we're going to be looking at maybe 8 or 9 o'clock. Actually, no, I think we'll be doing about 7 o'clock. We'll hit 7 o'clock on Thursday morning. So podcast will be released Thursday morning on audio, and it's going to be released Thursday morning on video. Probably around 7 o'clock, we'll start putting the video out. It's going to take maybe a couple weeks before we get that dialed in, but we're going to be shooting for 7 o'clock, 7 a.m. MST, so Mountain Standard Time. I think that will be a pretty good time for most people. A lot of people that listen to the podcast are in the West, not so much out here in the East, but I think that's going to be changing. That kind of gives you a schedule, what to be looking for here in the future. Just a real quick recap. We're going to be doing better quality on YouTube, one per week, more posting. I'm excited. I think this is going to be a lot of fun. I've been wanting to bring more quality to the podcast for quite some time, get these videos out. I've been archiving them, and I believe it's time to really get it out. About 150 episodes in, so I think we're good to start pivoting and make this transition. I would like to get more feedback. Just want everybody listening to the podcast to give me more feedback. I do want to reach out and give a shout out to a couple individuals that do follow the podcast. I'll start off with Kyler. Kyler reached out and said, been listening to all these sledding episodes, and they're awesome. Really cool to hear stories from riders I look up to and ride with. Dude, super stoked, Kyler. Thank you for sharing that. And then also Breyer. I've been listening to the podcast for about a month now, and I wanted to say I'm loving them. It's always awesome to hear from athletes in different sports. And I've gained so much knowledge just from that. There's a lot to learn on this podcast. I brought this podcast on, started doing it because of a selfish reason. I really wanted to learn a lot more myself because I missed an opportunity when I was young to get into racing and to get into the industry how I thought I should. And I don't want that to happen to anybody else. So that's why I actually started the podcast. I was really thinking about other people, and I'm excited. So grateful for everybody listening. If you haven't already subscribed, make sure you do subscribe and follow the podcast everywhere. You can go find me on social media, Colton Passy, on all the accounts. You can just literally Google Colton Passy, Colton, Kolton Passey, and you can find me on any social platform. You can also just search or Google search the Action Sports Podcast, and you should find it basically everywhere as well. If you haven't joined the club, the Action Sports Club, you're missing out. You got to get over there. It doesn't matter if you're a pro, a seasoned pro, there is some value and some information that you can gain from those guys. Tons and tons and tons of values. They've been rocking and rolling and really, really making a difference in the industry. Very happy, very proud of all the team over there and what they've been achieving and all the support they've been giving me. Very, very great crew, a very, very amazing crew. That was really terrible English, but they're an amazing crew. Let's just say that. And I'm excited for people to check them out. To get over there, though, if you haven't already joined the club, hit up ascarmy.com/podcast. I've already made that announcement as well from the beginning. I'm excited. There's going to be more things that I'm going to be unfolding here in the future, but for now, I think this is good enough. And honestly, we'll catch you guys later. Get out and ride.